Hi, I'm Jamie with Integra Electrical, and today I'm here with Ben Carpenter, who is a master electrician of 30 years, and I'd like to ask him some questions. And the first one I want to ask is, Ben, why would you say customers might need to be concerned about the wires running through their walls?
So wiring run through walls is subject to heating up and cooling down. It's very important that that wiring is inspected on at least an annual basis to make sure that it's operating optimally and doing what it's supposed to do. We just don't know what's happening behind the walls if we don't take time to inspect and test that, primarily with specialized equipment.
I was just going to ask you that. How exactly do the electricians go about inspecting that, since it's really not seen? It can't be seen by the eye.
That's a really good question. We inspect it with specialized equipment. We're actually able to put a load on that system, much like if you plug in a vacuum cleaner or a toaster or a heater, and we want to make sure that that system is operating optimally, and we can do that with our specialized equipment.
What happens when wires heat up and cool off behind walls?
When wiring heats up and cools off, there's an expansion and a contraction that happens. Just like anything, when metals expand, it can cause a connection to loosen, and when it contracts, that loose connection can cause arcing. And of course, arcing is directly related to fire. We want to prevent that.
Now, Ben, can you tell me what is the number one thing that somebody who's watching can do to determine if their home might be at risk?
Well, as a matter of fact, we have a quiz that's online. You take that quiz, that is going to direct you and give you some really good indication on whether your home needs a thorough electrical inspection.
So once in a while we get phone calls that come in that say there's a weird smell in the breaker panel, or it's buzzing and making a funny noise, or maybe even sparking. Why is this a cause for concern?
That is a really good question. Believe it or not, we've gotten all kinds of complaints on weird smells, even a sulfury kind of rotten egg smell that can be coming out of a breaker panel. Let me explain why this is a problem. Anytime we hear about sparking, buzzing, or indifferent smells that are coming out of a service panel, those are all indicating that either that service panel is working really hard to try to provide the current and the voltage that an electrical system needs to operate correctly. And if it's working too hard, or it's a very old system that's trying to work hard, that's going to be an indication that that system is about ready to fail. We definitely recommend it. Yeah.
What does a failure in that situation? What does a failure look like? I mean, what would someone?
That's a great question.
What would be the next
step?
Yep.
So a failure could be something as simple as the system, the circuit that is operating just doesn't work anymore. It might be that simple. It could be that it works part way, but not all the way. Or it could be really terrible failure, where the system actually catches on fire because the system is working so hard to try to provide the voltage and the current that you are requiring of it with the new appliance that you plugged in.
Fire guard breakers. Can you tell me what exactly they are, and how do you know if your panel has them?
Yeah, so fire guard breakers are breakers that are designed to see an electrical arc on a system and shut that system off.
And remind me what an arc is.
Yes, and shut that system off before the arc can cause fire. Arc is like a lightning bolt. That is the biggest arc that anybody can think of. But arcing in a home is also be a very small arc, much like even the igniter that you might see on a gas oven. That type of arcing in an electrical system, hidden behind the walls or in a switch box, can absolutely be what causes fire. And arc fault breakers, or fire guard breakers, are designed to see that arcing and shut that circuit off before fire comes.
And how is that different from just a regular breaker?
Yeah, a regular breaker doesn't have the technology to see that arcing. And so a regular breaker will just stay on and let it arc all day long until there's what we call a short circuit or an overload on the system. It will not shut that circuit off, and it can actually allow fire to ensue.
So what do fire guard breakers, what do they look like? How do you know if you have just regular ones, or?
Yeah, so first off, regular breakers are actually technology that started and was implemented in the 1950s and 1960s. And yeah, we still use that technology today, but we highly recommend the implementation of arc fault breakers or fire guard breakers. Now, the way that we can tell is the breaker is actually labeled AFI or AFCI right on the front of it. So when you open your breaker panel, you can see AFCI or AFI, and you'll know right away if that's an AFI breaker.
But can you tell us why might flickering lights be an indication that there is a problem going on in the circuit?
Flickering lights are indicative of an open or what we call a short circuit in a system. Anytime we have opens or short circuits and the power is still on where we can see that the lights are flickering, that is showing us that there's a strong possibility that heat is building up in very specific locations on that circuit.
Now, how might someone see this? Is it the lights are flickering constantly, or are they flickering on and off, or what happens?
That is a really good question. So what can happen is, depending on different things that are turned on in the home, can cause those lights to flicker at different times. And so we want to be conscious, what are we turning on, what are we turning off in that home? And that's going to be a spot that we're going to want to direct the electrician to really do a thorough inspection.
Most people think that non-working plug or switch is just a minor annoyance. You know, you flip it on, it doesn't work, big deal. Is there a reason that we should be a little more concerned about non-working plugs and switches?
Such an interesting question. So we get this all the time. A customer will be like, well, that plug hasn't worked for years. Well, if that plug hasn't worked for years, or even for a day or a couple hours, that can be indicating another major issue going on in that circuit that could actually end up expanding or spreading to other parts of the home. If you've got a plug or a switch that's not working, that needs to get reviewed right away by an electrician.
So I love my old home, but I know that there can be some issues that I need to be aware of because of its age. I mean, I have a 100-year plus home. So when a home gets to be, when the electrical system gets to be past the 20-year mark, what's happening? Why do we need to take a closer look?
Well, electrical systems age just like people. They age too. And when they age, they can get sore parts, if you will. And those sore parts are parts that often cause heat buildup, cause corrosion, cause other parts of the system to degrade, and ultimately are going to cause appliances that plug in to that system the potential for premature failure. And so a system that's 20 years old, and especially if that system's never been inspected, needs to be inspected right away so that we can validate the integrity of that system.
So even if nothing, I mean, I don't have anything that's not working.
Jamie,
So
even if it seems like everything is working okay now, just imagine when you unplug an appliance in one spot and you plug it into another spot, you have just altered that electrical system. And we don't know what's going to happen or if that system is going to always be working optimally when you've altered that system.
We've heard the horror stories about breaker panels labeled Zinsco, Federal Pacific, Sylvania, Bulldog, Pushmatic. We don't see them super often, but why are these super alarming when we see them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first off, those brands are all brands that aren't even produced anymore today. And that's because they're really, really old. And just like a body that ages, an electrical system ages, and when it ages, it no longer protects the electrical system the way it's supposed to. When it's not protecting the electrical system the way it's supposed to, hazards and major issues can happen. So we definitely recommend the replacement of any one of those systems.
Why particularly those brands? Why do they stick out? I mean, some of them aren't even, actually, I don't even think any of them are around anymore.
No, they're all obsolete. Any one of those brands right there indicates that those systems are 30, 40, 50, even 60 years old. And if they're that old and they've been operating in that electrical system this long, they are no longer offering the protection that a new system would offer.
Can you give me quickly some brands that have stood the test of time? Like, if we see them, they might be older, but they're not super alarming.
So I would, except that even a system that's 20 years old or 30 years old still needs a complete inspection. And I would love to say that there is any specific brand that we would say, without a doubt, has never had an issue, but even some of the most reputable brands recently have had substantial recalls on them. Just like cars, you hear about recalls from Ford or Chevrolet. The same thing can happen in an electrical system.
Now, can you tell us why might replacing an appliance cause an electrical issue? Why do we need to be concerned about
So,
that?
so that's a really good question. So if we're replacing appliances, especially if we're replacing appliances frequently, it could indicate that we've got some surges going on in the electrical system, causing what we call electronic rust to actually decay the insides of that appliance, causing us to replace it again and spending an inordinate amount of money, time, and irritation to have to replace that. Also, replacing an appliance could absolutely change the way that that circuit operates. And so when we change out appliances, sometimes they demand more from the circuit. We would want to consider that and have an electrician review those requirements and validate that that circuit is in good operating condition.
Okay, can you tell me, where does rust typically show up on a breaker panel, and why is it an issue? Why are we concerned about that?
That's another really good question. I hate to say this, but we shouldn't ever see rust in a breaker panel. Rust is indicating water, and everybody knows water and electricity are not a good mix. Rust also indicates substantial age. Not only do we have water, but we could have substantial age in electrical systems. We will see rust oftentimes in the bottom of a service panel, and that means that water has been dripping through that service panel.
Even if it's not wet?
Even if it's not wet, it's water that's been dripping through that service panel, ending up in the bottom, and that's where we would see the rust. Does that mean that that the water was only in the bottom of the panel? Absolutely not. It means water's been coming through the top to the bottom of that breaker panel, and we don't know how long.
Are there any other areas you should look at corrosion or rust or the warning signs?
One of the things that we do on every inspection, I wouldn't recommend this to a homeowner, but we remove the breaker panel cover, the service panel cover, and we actually go through and inspect the breakers to look for corrosion as well. If we see corrosion on the breakers, that again is going to be an issue that's going to cause heat buildup and could mean irreparable damage. Let me rephrase it. It will mean irreparable damage at some point in that service panel if it's not dealt with immediately.
So I think we all know that, and we can agree that smoke detection is really important. We need to have our smoke alarms. But can you give us some more information on maybe where they go, or something that is not common knowledge?
So that is a great question. We get this all the time. People don't realize this. First off, smoke detectors are only good for 10 years. The sensors inside smoke detectors are designed to last for 10 years, and oftentimes they don't even last that long. But if you've got a detector that's over 10 years old, it needs to be replaced right away.
And how does somebody know if it's over 10 years?
Yep, since 2000, smoke detectors actually started getting, since the year 2000, smoke detectors started getting dated on the back side of them. So what we do is we actually take them down, and we look for that date stamp on the back to find out how old they are.
Is there any benefit to having interconnected smoke detection as opposed to just sticking one up yourself? And it's very easy, go buy one at Menards and put it up yourself, and that's better than nothing. But what is the benefit of the interconnected?
So that's a really good question. So you can imagine in a home, let's say it's a two-story home with a basement, and the smoke detector in the basement is going off in the middle of the night when you're upstairs asleep in your room, and let's say there was a fire or smoke that was actually happening in the basement with the basement door closed. You may never hear that detector going off, but let me tell you what interlinked systems do. We call them interlinked for a reason. They are actually connected together, where that basement smoke detector will set off the smoke detectors in your bedroom and alert you to the hazard that's going on in the basement, and allow you to review what's going on and to get your family out and call the fire department right away. Oftentimes those detectors, if they weren't interconnected, you'd never know that there was an urgent situation going on in the basement.
Tripping circuit breakers, that is an issue that we hear very often. Why is this a potential warning sign?
So first off, a circuit breaker is designed to protect the wire inside the walls of a home from catching on fire and damaging that home or causing other issues, life safety issues. So if a breaker is tripping, it is protecting that wiring. We don't know why that circuit breaker tripped, and so we need to get out there and find out what happened to make that breaker trip to protect that wiring so that it doesn't cause the home irreparable damage.
So how often is too often for a circuit breaker to trip? When do we need to be worried?
Anytime a breaker trips, we need to be concerned. If it's happening repeatedly, for example, it's happening more than a couple times a year, that is a circuit that I would highly recommend gets inspected as soon as possible.
Is that something that that a homeowner should go and flip back on? At what point do they call?
Typically, I would recommend calling an electrician as soon as that circuit breaker trips, so that an electrician can come out with specialized equipment and find out exactly what caused that breaker to trip. It may be something super simple, and the breaker did and the entire system worked exactly the way it was supposed to. But it may be something somewhat more undercover that takes a little bit more diagnostic to establish what caused that breaker to trip.